We're now going to kind of zoom out a little bit and take a more global look at what we can learn from other countries. And we're delighted that to help us with this, we have Professor Lynn from the University of Cambridge to address us by Zoom. And I just want to say that to you as well, because it was the same the last time with Professor Kate Rayworth. They have the option to come, but people are making decisions not to have a reduced carbon footprint, and Zoom works excellently well, and so we're delighted to have Lynn present to us in this format. Lynn is a conservation scientist and an ecologist, and she's an expert in sustainable farming and insect conservation. So she's going to give us an international perspective on agriculture and biology, and she's going to stay on online so that she can join us for our Q&A after this presentation section. So please give a very warm Citizens Assembly welcome to Professor Lynn.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you. I'm really looking forward to hearing how the conversations pan out. And I'm also delighted to be able to be broadcasting to you live from my home office in South Cambridgeshire through the wonders of modern technology. So I'm going to give you a very broad overview of the issue of biodiversity in agriculture, a really international perspective. And some of what I'm going to say is somewhat outside the very specialist area that I work in, but I think it's important to give you this broad view at the moment. So where we start with this presentation is possibly, yes, there we go, is the extent of the world that's being used for agriculture. This is a visualization of data on global land use from Our World in Data. And at the top, you see how much of the Earth's surface is land. And obviously that bar shoots right off the slide, because most of the world is ocean, but 29% is land. And then of that land, 71% is habitable, which means we can live there, and it excludes things like deserts and rocks and salt flats. And of the habitable land, 50% of that is agriculture. So we're looking at half of the habitable land on Earth that's being used for agriculture at the moment. It then gets more interesting as you go down this chart here, because if you break down the agricultural land into how much of it is being used for crop production for human food, and how much of it is actually being dedicated to producing livestock, including where feed for livestock is being grown, most of the agricultural land, 77%, is given over to the livestock industry. And then if you look at how much where our food comes from, our calorie supply, as humans, 18% of it is from that livestock, from meat and dairy, and 82% from plant-based food. A bit more if you look at our protein supply, so 37% of the protein comes from meat and dairy. So this is how the world breaks down, and this is why agriculture is very important for biodiversity. I think you've seen this figure before. This is a summary of the status of biodiversity from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And I know you've heard from Bob Watson, so you will have seen this figure. On the right here, you have some examples of what's happening to nature, the state of decline. But I'm showing it to you now because I wanted to point out that this is the scientific consensus on what is driving the loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing at planetary scale. And so if you look at those direct drivers in the middle there, they're ordered according to the proportion of the impact that scientists believe comes from these different drivers. And the purple one, which is land and sea use change, is where agriculture sits. And you can see that it's the most important driver for terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity loss. You've talked a lot about climate change, and climate change is really important, but the scientific consensus at the moment is that land use change is the biggest cause of biodiversity loss, and that is mostly due to agriculture. There is some urbanization, urban expansion and so on, but it's mostly agriculture, and it's a combination of conversion of natural habitat to agriculture, and then following that, the intensification of the land use for agriculture with fewer and fewer habitats, less and less area for wildlife, space for wildlife, and more chemical use is what the intensification process entails. Now, I'm going to show you what's actually quite a beautifully done picture of the biodiversity loss that we're experiencing and the way we might tackle that. But it's important to know when you look at this picture, this is a visualization of a set of results from some very serious and detailed modeling of the way that biodiversity is declining and the way it might respond with different strategies or future scenarios of trying to tackle it. So the lines might just look like an artist just swept through with their hand there, but actually that reflects a figure in a scientific paper that was published in Nature, which is a set of modeled results. And you see this historical decline. What it's representing here is the mean species abundance. So how many animals and plants there are out there in the world. You see this decline going up to 2010, you've got years across the middle. And then if we don't do anything, we expect to see this continuing decline, which is the gray line. If we do everything we can as a world to do wildlife conservation in the traditional sense, with protected habitats that are really well managed, increasing the area of protected habitats and planning those habitats so that they're best placed to save the species that are most at risk, that's where you get the yellow line, increased conservation efforts. So you can, if you do all those things and you do them well, you can stem the flow, you can stop the loss of biodiversity, you can kind of flatten the curve if you like. But if we want to actually get back to where we were 100, 200, 300 years ago with thriving wildlife and good densities of species everywhere, we need to do more than that. In order to bend the curve, we need to first increase those conservation efforts, but we also need to have more sustainable production and more sustainable consumption. So we have to bring the food system into this. And this is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk, what those things mean: more sustainable production and consumption. So a complete overview for me involves having a very top level look at what the objectives should be to reduce that impact of agriculture on biodiversity. For me, at the moment, I think there's 4 things we need to be trying to do. The first one, and the most important, is we've got to find ways to stop agriculture from expanding into natural habitats. Then we have to produce food efficiently on the smallest possible footprint of land. So that's part of the sustainable production. But at the same time, and this is something you've probably been talking about already this morning, we need to produce that food in a way that doesn't continually degrade the land itself that's being used for production. We have to stop this soil loss and this declines in pollinators and other insects and farmland birds, for example, because in the long term, agriculture has to be sustainable and continue to be able to produce food. And then finally, we have to reduce land demand. And there are different ways to do this, but the 2 main ones are by shifting diets away from land-intensive products and by reducing food waste. So in a sense, from this list of 4, this number 2 there, producing food efficiently to reduce the amount of land we're using, and number 4, which is different demand side ways to reduce land demand, they are both ways of stopping agriculture from expanding into natural habitats. So I'm going to go through them one at a time. I don't have very much time, but the first one, so if you want to stop agriculture from expanding into natural habitats, the first thing you need to know is where in the world is agriculture currently expanding into natural habitats? And this map was published last year in the journal Nature Food, and it's an analysis that looks at how the cropland is changing only in the last 20 years. So these data are from 2000 to 2019. And it's a very fine scale modeling that's been done here to look at what's happening. So the dots are very small, the pixels are small, but all you need to do is look at the colors. So the green areas here are areas where the extent of cropland is stable, not changing very much in those last 20 years. The purple areas are areas where it's expanding, and the darker the purple, the more expansion there is. So when you get to dark purple areas, it's over 30% increase in cropland in this century. And the red areas are where the area of agricultural land or cropland is decreasing. So parts of Russia and Central Asia there, you have abandonment of agricultural land. But what you can see here is some pretty clear areas in the world where agriculture is currently expanding. You've got southern Brazil here, lots of expansion going on. You've got West Africa, East Africa, and some parts of more southerly in Africa. These are the areas where there's a lot of expansion. And I'm going to take you to one of those areas because it happens to be a place that I work. And that's almost imperceptible on this map. There's this tiny purple smudge there, which is the San Francisco Valley in northeast Brazil. This is what that looks like. In this part of the world, it's a dry tropical forest or quite shrubby. You can see in the bottom of this picture, there are some cactuses. This is a very special environment for its plant diversity. It's absolutely full of plants that are found nowhere else on Earth. And what's grown there is a combination of grapes and mangoes and a few other fruits, but mostly grapes and mangoes for export to international markets. And here you can see these green blocks in this picture. Those are growing what are called table grapes, and they are for sale from this farm in supermarkets in Europe, certainly in the UK. I don't know if they're available in Ireland, but this is for export to Europe and North America. In this landscape, you have a lot of very unique species. So for example, you have birds like the Cachinga. The Cachinga is the name of the biome, the vegetation there. You have the Cachinga cachalote and the Cachinga parakeet, which are found nowhere else on Earth. You have endemic plants like this amazing group of cactuses, which some people call Turk's cap cactuses, which produce these incredible sort of red towers of flowers on the top of them. And then also in these farms, we find species which are globally at risk of extinction. So this species is classed as vulnerable. It's the northern tiger cat. And we've actually recorded it on camera traps living in these areas on the side of these farms. So what I'm showing you here is an animation of the land use change in this area that I've just shown you a photo of from 1985 to 2020. And what you need to do here is look at the agriculture as it runs through the years. So starting in 1985, keep your eyes on the pink. What you see is the green forest decreasing and turning into agriculture, which in this map is pink. You also see the San Francisco River here, and this is where it's dammed. You have this big lake, which is why they're able to have lots of irrigated agriculture in this area. Just watch it for a little bit longer. It's really important to say, you'll notice that quite a lot of the land use change here actually happened before 2000, but it's still going on post 2000 up to 2020. You see the city expanding. This is Petrolina Juazeiro in northeast Brazil. It grows. You have these satellite city towns outside, and the agriculture blooms around them. But it's really important to say that from the perspective of the people who live in this region, this is a story of economic development. This is a very poor region of Brazil. They are benefiting. There's industry growing. There's global exports happening. So there is a lot of very difficult issues about how we solve the biodiversity problem, which I think are illustrated by this animation. You might be thinking, what does all this have to do with Ireland? Well, 25% of the food consumed in Ireland is produced domestically. 75% of it is imported. And not just Ireland, but countries in Western Europe and North America create a large part of their biodiversity footprint well beyond their borders. So in fact, 25% of the world's cropland is growing products for global trade. And I'm going to show you a map of where in the world food is coming into Ireland from. Now, this comes from an analysis that someone in my department, Thomas Ball, has just done, especially for this presentation. So it's not particularly published, but it's using a method that is published for working out exactly where food is coming from into a particular country. So this is the total mass of food imported in 2019 into Ireland. This is food for human consumption. And you've got thousands of tons imported per year as the scale here, which is the green coloration. We didn't put Ireland itself onto that scale because it would have dominated, because it's 25% would all be grown within Ireland. So Ireland looks blue on here, and you can see that most of the food is being imported actually from the UK, but you're also bringing in food from North America, South America, West Africa. Remember those regions where I said where I said agriculture was expanding in the world? You're buying food from those places. And it's not just about human food, animal feed. So the food that is fed to animals that are produced in Ireland is also imported from around the world. So now here is the same map, and this is for food that is fed to animals. So it's animal consumed mass or feed. And it's kind of similar. There's some different areas. There's actually more coming from South America when you look at animal feed. You don't have West Africa in anymore, but you can see you're getting food from all over the world, which is going to human food and animal feed in Ireland. And this is why it matters. So in addition to the second objective is to try and produce food more efficiently on the smallest possible footprint of land. If we want to stop agricultural expansion, that means we have to minimize the area on which we are growing food at global scale. And one of the really important ways to do this is to close what's called the yield gap. So to make sure that where we are producing food intensively, it's as much food as possible coming out of each unit of land. So here you see a map. There are many analyses like this. This happens to be part of China, and it's rice production, single crop a year rice production. And the colors here are showing you the percentage of the maximum potential rice yield that is being produced in these different regions. And what it shows is very clearly a lot of the areas of rice growing are not reaching the potential maximum yields that they could get, and is being demonstrated in other places with the same climate. So what the analyses that looking at how you might solve the biodiversity crisis often include is a scenario of sustainable production that is just about closing those yield gaps. And in this case, what closing the yield gaps means is on this map, you would turn all of the rice growing areas to red. So they would all be producing 80 to 85% of the maximum rice yield for that area. So I'd like you to discuss and think about for yourselves, is that going to be good for the wildlife that lives in those rice fields? How does that look from a biodiversity within agricultural landscapes perspective? And this is where the real trade-off comes between biodiversity and food production. Because I'm sure you'll realize, as I do, that there might be negative impacts of increasing the intensity even further than we already have. And this is where my third objective comes in. The area that I work in is within agricultural land. We obviously have to produce as much food as we possibly can. We don't want unproductive systems that drive further expansion into natural habitats, but we don't want to completely take out all the biodiversity from the productive fields. We need to redesign agricultural systems so that instead of the picture on the left, which is a perennial fruit production system in a conventional sense, we have agricultural landscapes that look more like the picture on the right, a productive system integrated with native biodiversity. And it's not going to be necessarily organic farming, because organic farming often comes with a yield penalty that's up to 20% less yield per unit area. So there's a lot of thinking and a lot of research, a huge amount of research in this area, both going on and also to do, to try and establish what this system on the right actually looks like in all the different contexts where food is being produced in the world. But we have to produce food in a way that doesn't continually degrade the soil, cause pollinator decline, degrade the insects that are part of the food production system. I'm just going to show you one small example of the way in which insects are part of the system and part of the productivity of agricultural landscapes in the long term. And that's about pollinators, which you might have heard of before. So here is a typical Northern European agricultural landscape. You have a crop of buckwheat at the front and a crop of oilseed rape at the back. You can see millions probably of flowers here, but every single one of those flowers has to be visited by an insect in order to get its full yield. And the oilseed rape at the back, those pollinators that pollinate oilseed rape are a combination of bees, wild bees usually, and things like hoverflies and other flies and beetles. Every single flower needs to be visited 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 times in order to produce the maximum yield. So the landscape itself has to support those insects, and they're wild, they're free-living insects. Here's a data set which is actually from Ireland, oilseed rape growing in Ireland, led by Dara Stanley, just to show you what happens if you don't have those insects to the yield of oilseed rape. So here you have flowers that have been bagged, so the insects have been excluded. And this is where the supplemented is where the pollination's been done by hand, and the open is where the flower was just open to being visited, like these flowers in the pictures on the right. And the y-axis here is this mean seed weight per pod, so it's one of the measures of yield. If you don't have those pollinators, you have a 30% decrease in seed weight per pod. So in order to have productive agricultural land for the long term, we have to find a way of looking after the pollinators, and that's what I mean about having agricultural systems that don't degrade their own environment. My final objective, objective number 4, is a different way of reducing land demand. And this is, again, there's a lot of work going on in this area at the moment. We really need to think about shifting our diets away from very land intensive products and reducing food waste, because food waste is, if you're producing a lot of food in order to feed the world, and then you're wasting, in many cases, up to half of the food that you've produced, that's really not very sensible, not an efficient use of land at all. So I'm just going to show you, again, from our world in data, a visualization of the land use per kilogram of food products. And this is something that's being used a lot to understand the sustainability of different foods. It's a way of thinking about it, which says, so how much land in total do we need to produce a kilogram of this particular product? And that includes the land where that product is produced, and if it's meat, the land which is used to grow the food that's fed to that meat. And because it's calculated like that, what you see is that the most land intensive products are the red meats and cheese, which is also associated with cows, of course. Dark chocolate also makes an appearance quite high on this plot, so we should all be thinking quite carefully about how much chocolate we consume. And an objective here for solving the problem of biodiversity in agriculture is to move everybody's diets a bit further down on this plot. So we're all eating more of our protein coming from nuts and pulses and just a little bit less meat. That's all I'm going to say to you. I just wanted to leave you with this picture because I'm an entomologist. If we want to save the incredible biodiversity we have on the planet, we have to tackle the problem of agriculture and the way that it's causing biodiversity decline. And if we do that and we get it right, we can hope to see all these amazing beasts into the future, both us and our children. So I'll leave you with the 4 objectives as a summary. At the moment, I think what we need to do to save biodiversity through changing agriculture is to stop it from expanding into natural habitats, to farm on the smallest possible footprint of land, to produce food in a way that doesn't continually degrade land, and reduce land demand by changing our diets and reducing waste. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Evine, and thank you all for being here and making it back after lunch. It's always a bit of a struggle, but it's a privilege to be here, and I mean that very sincerely. I give talks at different times to different people, but I think this is probably one of the more important groups I've ever spoken to, and I take that very seriously, and I think the work that you're doing and will do is really, really important. So what I wanted to do for the next 15 minutes is kind of give you maybe some inspiration and some ideas and some very concrete case studies. I don't claim to be an expert, absolutely not, but I'm a good listener, I'm told, and I think that goes a lot to explaining the work that we do in Clare, and the work that we do there in Clare and Galway. It's not just my work, there's a lot of people involved, but I wanted to tell you the story of the Burren and the success we've had with farming and biodiversity in that area over the last 25 years, not even 20. So I wanted to talk specifically about the farming community, you know, in a positive sense, in terms of what farmers can actually do in the form of being a solution rather than the problem to this biodiversity crisis that we have. And I completely believe that. I'm not being insincere, I'm being absolutely real when I think farmers have the keys to unlocking the solutions to this biodiversity crisis that we have. And if we can mobilize those farmers at scale, we can do anything. So this is a little case study of what we've been doing in Clare. The Burren, a beautiful part. You have to come. In 2 weeks' time, we've got our big Winterage Festival, so please do come along. It's full of biodiversity. Plants from the Arctic, the Alpine region, from the Mediterranean region, full of orchids, riddled with the most wonderful insects that you'll ever imagine, the most incredible creatures, and I think Lynn would appreciate them if she ever did come over to see us. But at the very heart of the Burren, the lifeblood of the Burren, are the people and their farming practices. And we often forget that when you read books about the Burren, read about the archaeology and the geology and the flora and the fauna, but actually we don't hear much about the people. And people have farmed in the Burren, like this man here, Pat Nagle. His ancestors have been farming here for hundreds and thousands of years. The oldest structure built by farmers in Ireland is in the background. Paul na Brone, built 6,000 years ago by farmers in this landscape. And I just wanted to explain something very simply. Farming has a huge impact on our landscape, as we know. So if you take a typical little section of a field in the Burren, this is farmed, this is grazed during wintertime, in fact, in the Burren. If you have too much farming, and you improve the land and fertilize it, maybe reseed it, you do lose a lot of your biodiversity. And farmers do that in order to increase production and meet the marketplace. That in turn can lead to visual pollution and damage to our soil and our water. We know that. Probably what we don't recognize as much is too little farming can result in loss of biodiversity as well. And in the Burren, you get very rapid scrub encroachment and damage to your archaeology and an increased risk of fire. So we are trying, my team and I, to maintain the balance between farming and the landscape in order to produce the most of what we call ecosystem services, great food from a great environment. So how do we do that? Well, we like to think like a farmer. We like to get inside the farmers' minds and to think what influences them. This is an amazing farm leader, and I think leadership has a big role to play in this biodiversity crisis. Michael Davran. So Michael, as well as producing great livestock, for many generations, we're now asking Michael to produce biodiversity, cultural heritage, clean water, healthy soils. You know, that's the future for him. That's what we'd like him to do. But what does Michael think about that? And sometimes very critical of farmers for damaging the environment without actually understanding why they do what they do. And I think we've been trying to get inside the minds of these people. So first of all, farming is a business. Is this farming for nature going to cost me? And if so, who's going to pay? And how long am I going to get paid for? Secondly, I have an advisor for beef, I have an advisor for dairy, but who advises me on farming for biodiversity? Where do I get that information in a way that's relevant to my farm? Because everywhere is different. The Burren is different from Wicklow, it's different from Connemara. How do I farm for nature? And really importantly, and we haven't talked about this so far, I think, is what will my neighbours think of me? If I go down this green route, am I going to be accused of being a hippie or something? This is risky business. I want to be sure before I step forward here. What will other people think of me? What will my peers think? You're asking me to do a lot here, and I need comfort. So we've been trying to answer those questions and give farmers reassurance over the past 20 years. Very briefly, on the payments, we believe that farmers produce potentially not just good food, but a good environment. If farmers aren't producing good environmental outcomes, I don't think they should be paid environmental subsidies or payments. But if they are, by God, I think they should be paid plenty, way more than they're being paid at the moment. So in the Burren, we piloted a system about 15 years ago of where we score every field on the farm out of 10. And the more biodiversity, the better soil, the better water quality, the more money you get. And farmers responded to that really immediately, pretty much, and very easily, because we said to them, it's like bringing your animal to the mart. When you bring your animal to the mart, the better the condition of the animal, the more money you get. Well, it's the same with your environment. The better condition, the more money. And then they're figuring out, right, well, how do I do this? This is interesting. This is an incentive. So for about $1 million a year, we pay Burren farmers to manage this vast, hugely important global landscape. That's a bargain. It's a huge bargain. And the beauty of it is we never tell the farmers what to do. We say, this is what we want, and when you produce it, we'll give you funding, we'll give you payment. We guaranteed for the next 5 years. We hope to guarantee for 20, but at the moment it's 5. So we're giving them an incentive. We're translating money into outcomes on behalf of the taxpayer. In many cases, it's a case of addressing issues for farmers. So we also give them funding to address point source pollution, for instance. If a farmer wants to do that, we'll give him some funding, and that'll help increase his environmental payment. If he wants to improve access or repair walls in order to, target grazing a little bit better, we'll fund them for that. Or if he wants to remove invasive species, we'll give him funding for that. So this is creating new roles for farmers as basically conservators of a farmed environment. So not just to producing food and getting paid for the outcomes, they're also getting paid to address environmental issues at farm level. It wouldn't pay them to do this otherwise. This is why we're having to support this. But there is an appetite. And again, we never tell the farmers what to do, because for farmers, a big reason for being a farmer is that nobody tells me what to do. I can decide what I want to do when I get up in the morning. So that's really important to us as well. So it reduces, we often talk to farmers as well, a lot of them are really concerned about, I just want to leave my farm in better condition for the next generation. And we, hand on heart, believe that this will do that. And that's very reassuring to those farmers. Helps to reduce input costs and improve the condition for future generations. And that's the payment part of how we pay farmers. Very simple, very effective. Secondly, when there's an incentive, you're going to want to get it. So you're going to want the information as to how you can farm in a way that deliver these outcomes. So right in the heart of the Burren, between the school and the church, we have a little office. And that's open 5 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, to farmers who want to learn more or ask questions about farming for nature. But not only that, it deals with the Department of Ag. If a farmer has a problem with his paperwork, we'll sort it out. In a landscape like the Burren, you need permission to get out of bed in the morning. Everything requires permission. So we help the farmer with the permissions. We've created a bureaucratic, free system for the farmers. So instead of a farm plan that looks like a telephone directory, we'll give them a one-page plan with a picture of their farm and a picture of what they're getting paid for on the other side of it. So taking a farmer-centered approach. Farmers don't like paperwork, they want to get on with the farming, and we enable them to do that. And it works very well. So this is the only slide I'll show you. This is a slide of 15 years worth of, or 12 years worth of working with farmers in the Burren to improve environmental outcomes. The one thing you'll notice about this graph is it's heading towards the ceiling. And this captures the environmental health of the Burren, and it's improving year on year by virtue of paying farmers for these environmental results and also supporting them with good information and advice as to how to do so. So it can be done. This is an external evaluation which also put a price on that improvement in biodiversity. So nature can pay, not just what the farmers get paid, but the benefits to the taxpayer, to society, have been put at the region of 33 million euros worth since 2010. So it can pay, generating environmental outcomes as well as economic outcomes for farmers. Now, that's the Burn programme, so there's loads more information on it, but I just wanted to show you what's possible at a significant landscape scale over a significant period of time. We can work with farmers to improve biodiversity and environmental outcomes. But the third piece, which really fascinates me, this is Oliver Nagel and his family, amazing Burn farmers. I just think these guys are phenomenal. Oliver and his father, Pat, are a tonic. They love their place, they love their farm, they love their livestock, they love the Burn, and they love the whole story of the Burn. And on that farm, every field scores 10 out of 10. In other words, the farmer's delivering as much as he possibly can on that farm. Now, he's cleaned up all the water supplies and created new habitats for freshwater invertebrates. He's put these beautiful Burn gates in and repaired hundreds and hundreds of meters of stone walls, which have been there for hundreds of years. And he's produced biodiversity that's fit literally for a king. This is King Charles when he visited the Burn, and this farm he wanted to see when he came to Ireland. That farmer's doing something right. Now, of all the farmers, he's getting the same opportunities for income and support. But why is he doing it so much better than everybody else? That question fascinates me, and I think for me it's all about the heart. So when we want farmers to farm for biodiversity, it's about the pocket, the business, the head, the advice and the support, but also about the heart. Any of us, when we go to work, want to believe in what we do, that it's important, that it's something that's worth doing. And Oliver and Pat certainly believe that. They have a strong connection with their farm and with the archaeology and the biodiversity on that farm, and they're hugely proud. So a little organisation called the Burn Bio Trust has been working on this for about 20 years. So the first thing we did is we published a book with Teagasc's support about farming and the Burn. And this is giving farmers ownership of the landscape, which had been kind of taken from them by all the experts. So we gave them back their story, and they felt they were now part of the story and part of the solution. We have been running training courses, education courses in local schools. All these landscapes, as was pointed out this morning, have been designated, but nobody's really told people why these places are globally important. So we run courses, about 10-week courses in the local schools, and after 10 weeks, the local kids graduate as Burn experts. Now, these are farmers' sons and daughters, and they're as proud as punch to be Burn experts. And from the point of view of pest to power alone, it's a phenomenal program. It's graduated about 3,000 kids over the last 20 years, all through charity. And we've expanded that through the Heritage Keepers program with the Heritage Council. We have a volunteer corps who go out doing archaeological digs, so you can, as a farmer or as a resident of the Burn, you can get your hands dirty and dig into the Burn, literally, and learn about it. We have something called Tea Talks. Right through the winter in Tubber Hall, we put on a cup of tea and invite the community in, farmers and other people in the community, and we have a talk about butterflies or gentians or orchids or something like that. It's a way of going into the community space and engaging those people with their amazing natural surroundings. Every month for the last 12 years, we've had a walk, usually led by a farmer. So picture this, a farmer taking a group of general public out onto his land, telling them about his farming system, about what he did as part of the programme, about that little flower there, he's not quite sure the name of it, that monument. And the public love it because it's authentic. But the empowerment for the farmer is phenomenal because now he's not just a food producer, he's doing something that people really love and value. And that's been a really positive experience for us and can be replicated in any farmed landscape anywhere in Ireland or anywhere in the world. And what we're very proud of is our Winters Festival. So every year we invite a farmer, and this particular year was Aoife Ford, an amazing young female farmer and an early graduate of our Burn Experts programme. And Aoife took the public up to see her farm one day 2 years ago, just before COVID actually. And she said, come on, let's all be farmers for a day. So she took them up the mountain, and if you follow the cattle down, 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 and the people going back, all the way to about 1,000 people went with Aoife that year. It's very labour-intensive, farming in the west of Ireland. I'm joking. But it's a great way of highlighting the fact that farming isn't just about food production. Farming is about our culture, our identity. It's about our landscapes, our biodiversity, and that should be celebrated. So we even had the priest bless the cattle. And the farmer said, should they all have twins when they're up there? And I just wanted to finish off then with 2 quick slides. Just about the fact that the Burn is a great exemplar of how farming can work to improve our biodiversity and our cultural heritage and our landscape. And it's a real success story, and it's got a lot of credit thanks to the hard work and the determination of a lot of people. But from working with farmers in the Burren, we really believe that there's great farmers, not just in the Burren, but right across Ireland. And we need to identify, celebrate, and support those farmers. So we set up something with Board Bia's help a few years ago called Farming for Nature. And we identified people from tillage to dairy to beef to sheep who are actually farming in a way that enhances their local farmed environment. So these are the type of people who, day in, day out, while we're here having nice lunches, are out there on the hills and out there on the fields farming for nature and for biodiversity. These genuinely are my conservation heroes. They do it day in, day out. They're phenomenal. And the reason we wanted to celebrate them was we need new voices in farming. We need people who are on the ground, who are humble, who speak from experience, and who other farmers respect. So we need new voices. When you're talking to a farmer about biodiversity, it's not as effective if you're a politician or if you're a scientist. If you're another farmer speaking to your neighbour about what you did for biodiversity, that has so much more credibility. So these ambassadors, we harvest their knowledge through videos, through farm walks, through podcasts, through little questions and answer sessions, through online fora, through best practice guidelines. Speaking to the point earlier this morning about where do you get the information, I think the best source is from other farmers. So we're trying to harvest the information from these farmers and share it. But genuinely, it's a fantastic resource. And if you want an insight into farming for nature and how it can really work, these are super farmers. They're not hobby farmers, they're real farmers with a good business acumen, but a real love for nature and for place. And the second story I wanted to tell you was about the appetite for action. One thing I've often found working with farmers is that the talk and the reports and all, that's all grand, but just can we get on with it? Can we please just get on with it? There's a real appetite for doing things. So we tested this about 2 years ago with a little project called the Hare's Corner. Now the Hare's Corner is an expression reflecting that piece of the field where the heavy machinery could never get into, and it's kind of, maybe it's too wet or too rough or too difficult to corner, and so it is left to nature. So we borrowed that phrase, and with funding from the Department of Ag and from Clare County Council, we launched a little initiative called the Hare's Corner. And we said to people in County Clare that, look, if you want to put in a little pond or a little woodland or a little orchard, we'll give you some funding and some advice on how to do so. And within 6 months, we had 43 orchards sourced from Seed Savers, that amazing Clare charity, planted. We had 32 ponds right across the county. We had 38 of these woodlands with these rare Burren pines in them. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. People are hungry to do something. People do care. It's not just farmers, it's also landowners. So I think give them the opportunity. I think a lot of people are nervous about doing the right thing. It's hard to know what to do the right thing anymore between biodiversity and climate and water and all these other concerns and food. So give them the opportunity and they won't disappoint. And we'd love to see that programme expanded north and south in future years. So finally, and I see my light has gone amber, this is Philomena Hines, another great biodiversity hero of mine who farmed the most wonderful 100-hectare farm in the Burren and loved her place. And this is Fergal Smith and Paddy Healy, other people. So in conclusion, I really, really believe that farmers have a crucial role to play in reversing biodiversity loss. The big question is, like, we've got a biodiversity crisis. We need to move at scale immediately. And I think farmers are capable of doing that. But how do we mobilize them at scale? I think there's great examples all over the country as to how we do it. You know, it's not rocket science. We know how to do it. We know from the Burren and programs like the Hare's Corner that, you know, there's a good appetite to do this amongst farmers. We've seen in the Burren as well that taking this approach of recognizing the pocket, the head and the heart, that you can really deliver for nature and for people. So I think we know what to do. With Burren Programme, Farming for Nature, Hare's Corner, show that it can be done. This is the kicker here, with sufficient determination and innovation and creativity. We need to be determined. So when I was reflecting on this, I was saying to Avian before, over the past week about what I'd say today, I kept coming back to the same thing is, when we talk about how do we reverse biodiversity loss, the real question is how badly we want to. If we want to, we can. Simple as, but do we have enough determination? Do we have enough imagination? Do we have enough creativity? Because if we do, there's no reason why it can't be done. Thank you very much.